We have Mr. Jim Khalili, okay, and he's going to be our guest today, guest of honor again. And I do think of him as a caricature of a physicist, and this is what I'm going to cover right now. So these are essentially, I'm going to start with the objections so that you can see later on how I cover each one of these points. First one is that he states that gravity is the central to his line of work. So he's more or less an expert. He's a PhD out of university in England. And so he says that gravity is what he studies or is important to his line of work. So we got the right guy here. We have a mathematical physicist who studies gravity. Okay, good, good. We got the right guy. And so welcome to our group, to our chat, Mr. Khalili. We'll speak for you or have you speak through us. Okay. The first problem, he can't define mass. He doesn't know what mass is. And even though mass is central to gravity, black holes, dark matter, all that stuff that the mathematicians invented. So he doesn't know what mass is. He tries to define it, but we'll find out that other people object to his definition. And it's not me, okay? Gravitational time dilation is debunked with two hourglasses. I'm going to show that today. Doesn't understand the difference between describe and explain. Okay, math describes, physics explains, so we have a difference there. And he doesn't understand. He goes back and forth between describe and explain, especially when he deals with Newton. I'm going to cover that. Claims without justification that there is no object. He gives the example of a string between the earth and the sun. And no justification for that. Yes, there is an object, just that we can't see or touch it. That's it. Makes a rational proposal that matter warps time. No such object as time, so you can't turn it into a banana and say, oh, time is warped. Asserts that a telescope proved that matter warps space. I don't know how a telescope proved that if space is not a physical object. And then he says that time is not money. Time is gravity. Time is gravity. Okay, so that's what I'm going to cover now. Okay, so there's the rundown. I'll return to that at the end of the lecture. Okay, so here it goes. Okay, first one, he says that gravity is part of it, central to his work. And in exploring it, I'll be challenged in how I understand this most mysterious force. Turns out he talks about the mysterious force, then he says he knows what it is, then he says it's still a mysterious force. We don't know what it is. So does he know or doesn't he know? And well, you will never find out from him because he goes back and forth saying, oh, we know what it is. Like he's going to conclude that time is gravity. And then he says, we don't know what it is. Partly because they don't know what time is, partly because they haven't defined the word time. So that's goes on and on and on and on. Okay, gravity's many mysteries are all contained in this single action, how an object falls. And what he does, he drops, I think it was a rock first or an apple. I think he dropped an apple, okay? And into the water, and he says, this is what it's all about. And he's totally right. The only experiment you ever had to do, I'm going to do it with a rock, okay? Here it is. This is the only experiment, repeatable experiment you ever had to do regarding gravity in your life in the last 500 years. You let go of the rock, and it falls all the way to the floor. That's it. That's the experiment. What do you want to do 500 more experiments? You want to do it a million times to make sure that the rock falls to the floor? Yes, it will fall to the floor. You do it once, you're finished. You never do an experiment on gravity again. Now the issue is explaining how Mother Nature does that. You're not going to explain it with math because math can only describe. You can only explain it with objects. Something invisible and intangible to us comes in contact with every atom of the stone. And that's what Newton's equation more or less describes. Okay, he never explained it, but he described it like that. Okay, here's our first encounter with Mr. Al-Khalili or Jim. Okay, for those who are friends with him, like me. Okay, he tries to define the word mass. He says mass is often confused with a related quantity, weight. Confused? They're the same. They're synonyms. Weight and mass are synonym, perfect synonym. There's no difference between mass and weight. So whatever they taught you in high school, in college, if they taught you that they're different, they lied. Because the way we determine mass is through weight, and they've never been able to separate that. But let's continue. The mass of these dumbbells, he had two dumbbells there, I think he was one of them, is fixed. Okay, it doesn't change. It's a measure of how much stuff they contain. Absolutely not. It's not a measure of how much stuff they contain. That's not what mass is, because we measure mass through weight. We weigh it. We put it on a scale. That's one way. There's another way, but primarily that's the one. And anyways, we have here two gurus, and I've mentioned these guys before. Nature does not offer us any concept as the amount of matter, which is what Khalili is referring to. History has struck down every proposal to define such a term. Even if we could count number of atoms or by any other counting method try to evaluate amount of matter, that number would not equal mass. Okay, that's my first piece of evidence to show that this fellow doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. Here we have the Wikipedia, just to rub it in. Mass is not the same as weight, okay? Then what is it? Even though mass is determined by measuring the object's weight. Yeah, that's how they measure it. So that's why we have no difference between mass and weight. We don't count atoms to determine mass. What we do is we weigh it. Second point there, in physical science, one may distinguish conceptually between at least 7 different aspects of mass, or 7 physical notions that involve the concept mass. So these people have no idea what mass is. They've never defined the term. They have no idea. They defined it, then they redefined it and defined it once again just in case. So we have 7 notions, and people just use whichever notion comes to their mind, okay, whichever one helps them. Then we have the physics fact, and I like this one because these guys consider themselves gurus. They're experts. They know it all. And they say mass measured in kilograms refers to an intrinsic property of an object. Aha! Whereas weight measures an object's resistance to deviating from its natural course of free fall. The weight of an object equals its mass times the local, okay, acceleration due to gravity. That means it's location specific. That's what a weight is. We don't need to move anything to have weight. Weight means how far you are from an object, which is Newton's equation. This idea of weight is independent of the object's state of motion, of course, and doesn't consider any contact force. Okay, so weight is location specific. Now, when we get to another little article that the physics fact has, it says, when the particle, referring to the photon, right, is at rest, its relativistic mass has a minimum value called the rest mass. No, it doesn't have a minimum value. It has 0, but they weren't willing to say that. Rest mass of the photon is 0. Okay, and these people kind of lie. They try to weasel out and they say it has a minimum value. Okay, what value does it have? What is this rest mass of the photon if it has a minimum value? No, it's 0. But this is the funny part. It says, as the particle is accelerated to ever higher speeds, its relativistic mass increases without limit. So it's not an intrinsic property mass, right, of the photon, because the photon has no mass. But when it moves, which is actually, what we're talking about here is weight, another way of measuring weight. When you move, if you jump on the scale, you'll see that you weigh a lot more. And that's what they're saying. Relativistic mass is mass in motion. And that is not an intrinsic property of the photon or of the thing in question. Okay? They can't say it's an intrinsic property if they say it relates to, it's has to do with motion. If it has to do with motion, it's got to do with all the stars in the universe, because that's what you're running against, known as Mach's principle. Okay, so they don't have any idea what mass is, and so Al-Khalili is talking out of his, behind. Okay, let's move on here. Jim did a lousy job with mass because he thought it was the quantity of matter. He thought it was an intrinsic property. No, it ain't. Right now, the only way we determine mass is through motion. We either put it on a scale or set it in motion. And in both cases, in one case it's location specific, and that's called weight. So there's no difference between mass and weight. And we don't count atoms, so we don't know how many atoms an object has. So mass is not the quantity of atoms or the quantity of matter or a measure of quantity of matter, because a measure means you're going to move it. And measuring is not counting. People don't understand that, especially mathematicians. They don't understand the difference between measuring measurement and counting. Measure is something, in this case, pertinent to this discussion, is when you move something, okay? So it's got to do with motion. That's what measuring is, because you're going to measure how much something weighs against the scale, okay? You're not counting atoms, which is what the quantity of matter refers to. Nobody counts atoms to determine how much mass you have. The way they do it is they put it on a scale and weigh you, okay? That's one way of doing it. Okay, next issue, time dilation. Why does gravity change with altitude, he asks. Okay, why? I've got two identical clocks here. Now, because the clock lower down is closer to the center of the Earth, it feels ever so slightly a stronger gravitational pull than the clock higher up. Einstein's theory says that the lower clock will tick by at a slightly lower rate than the higher clock. Basically, gravity slows time down. Is this true? Well, let's find out, because this is a cornerstone of Einstein's theory of gravity, gravitational time dilation. That's what it's called, okay? Let's find out if what this fellow Al-Khalili, who just memorized stuff in college, is correct, if he's got his facts right, okay? We're going to talk about facts, objective facts here, okay? Here it goes. Yeah, he's got to be surprised, because if we put two hourglasses, the one that is closer to the Earth will tick faster. The grains will fall faster, or at worst, it'll fall at the same as the ones on top. In fact, if I take that hourglass farther and farther away from the Earth, where we still have a little bit of gravity, those grains will fall a lot slower. That means that time will go a lot slower in the upper hourglass than in the lower hourglass. The lower hourglass will clearly pull those grains faster than the one on the top. So the way you measure time dilation, gravitational time dilation, in an objective way is not using an atomic clock, not using what Al-Khalili used, which is an alarm clock. No, what we use is an hourglass, which is a gravitational clock. That's what you use to measure time in relation to gravity, okay? So don't bring your clocks, I'll bring mine, okay? I'll bring my 5-cent clocks, and I'll do the experiment my way, okay? And then prove, I mean, if experiments prove anything, okay, here's an objective experiment that proves that gravitational time dilation from Einstein, a cornerstone of general relativity, is absolute garbage, okay? It can be thrown in the trash can. Okay, and just in case we rub it in, because if the Earth were closer to the Earth, just location we're talking about here, if the Earth were just standing still and closer to the sun, it would weigh more than if it's farther away. Just that simple. Why? Because weight is location specific, and weight is a measure of gravity. And the way we do that in science is say that, you know, all the ropes are connected to, from the sun, are connected to every atom that comprises the Earth. The closer the Earth is to the sun, the more the ropes open up, and that's why the Earth weighs more closer to the Earth. That's why the acceleration of gravity is faster, closer to the sun, and why it's less farther away. That's why an astronaut has very little weight out there and floats in space. Why? Because he's so far away that the number of ropes that are converging upon every atom in his body have more or less, you know, turned into a single coaxial. Okay, so he doesn't have that pull that you get as you approach the Earth and the ropes fan out. He doesn't have that. That's why he floats out there in space. Okay, here Al-Khalili shows that he doesn't know the difference between a description and an explanation. Math only describes, so he can't use the word explain anytime he uses the word math or relates in the context of math, okay, equations and whatever. He says, Newton said there is an attractive force between any two objects in the universe. Yeah, okay. Newton's equation describes, uses the word describe, correct. why an object falls to the ground. An equation can only describe it. An equation has no power to explain whatsoever. Nothing out of mathematics can do anything other than describe. It has no power to explain. But then he moves on and he says his law of gravitation can still be used today to explain how orbits work. Oh yeah, how do orbits work? Why doesn't the Earth fly out of the solar system if you can explain the mechanism? What are you going to explain with an equation? And see, this is the issue. Then he says Newton's famous equation also explains the strange effects that objects get lighter as you gain in altitude. Yeah, how does it explain it? Please explain. No, they describe, they say, if you're farther away, the equation says that the greater the distance, the less you weigh. That's all the equation says that, but that's a description. That's not an explanation. This fellow doesn't know the difference. Why? Because he was just a little altar boy that got his PhD by repeating what he was taught by rote. That's it. So he has no idea what the difference between a description and an explanation is. In science, we explain. In physics, we explain. In math, they describe. And so this guy's a mathematician. He's not a physicist. He's just a petty mathematical physicist. Physicist is too big a word. He's just a mathematician. And all he does is describe. He can't explain a single thing, and you'll see that in a minute, as soon as I get there. Okay, so what does Al-Khalili do? Well, he goes in there and he tries to explain gravity, and he says, look, imagine I'm Newton's gravity, okay? Why Newton's, how he interpreted Newton's equation. Imagine I'm the sun and this tennis ball is the earth in orbit around me. Newton's law can describe very precisely the path the earth takes around the sun in terms of the mutual gravitational attraction between the two bodies. He uses the word describe, correct. But what Newton can't explain, Newton, Einstein, no one in mathematical physics, no mathematician on earth can't explain is what connects them, the sun to the earth. In reality, of course, there is no invisible string between the earth and the sun holding the two together. How did he determine it? He just says that? I mean, where did he get that? Sure there is, okay? There's just empty space, a complete void. I think the void is between his two ears. He hasn't justified that statement like no mathematicians in the last 400 years has justified that statement, that there is nothing between two atoms, between the earth and the sun. That it's just empty space, whatever empty space is, because they don't believe in empty space either. They say it's made out of particles, so we don't know what they're talking about when they say empty space. And yet, according to Newton, the earth and the sun pull on each other instantaneously across a vast distance, correct? How can gravity act in this way when there's nothing to connect or transmit it? Well, if there's nothing, you can't explain it. It's only when there is something, then you can explain it. And here's that something, okay? So let's show Mr. Al-Khalili why he was too quick in dismissing that string, that something which he calls nothing. Here it is. Okay, so he might be surprised to learn that every atom on Earth is connected to every atom in the sun, and the sun just simply twirls it around, just like he's showing there on the bottom left. That's how the sun twirls the Earth around. Now we can explain gravity, or why the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system. Why? And why it keeps the orbit? Because the sun just keeps rolling the Earth around nothingness, which is all that space, all that black stuff. Okay, there. And just keeps rolling it around. Why? Because every atom on Earth is connected to every atom of the sun. There is a something. Something's known as ropes, electromagnetic ropes, and those ropes you cannot see or you cannot touch. Okay, you cannot see or touch the ropes, because if we could see or touch the ropes, which is the hang up it just about everybody has out there who gets shocked by it, we can't see or touch because Mother Nature made them intangible and invisible. Why? Because an object is not that which is tangible or visible, it's that which has shape. That's first. And second, if we could see or touch the rope, we would be tangled in knots, and that's all we would see. We would just see ropes everywhere. Fortunately, we can't see the ropes. Fortunately, we can't touch the ropes, because Mother Nature was smarter than all the people on Earth who are asking for tangibility, proof of tangibility and invisibility. That's the problem. The problem is you're asking a stupid question when you ask to touch the rope through an experiment or to see the rope. You will not see it. You got to visualize it so that you can imagine the mechanism. You got to figure out the mechanism that Mother Nature is trying to figure out here is how what she uses. That's what you're trying to figure out. Okay. Here we have an interesting point that he tried to make. Okay, and that's Einstein said that the man feels no force pulling on him because there is no force pulling on him. In other words, when the man falls from with an elevator, okay, he doesn't feel his own weight. He's just floating in space like an astronaut would. That's the principle of equivalence of Einstein, right? Gravity doesn't act on him. It acts on the space and time around him. That's what Einstein discovered, or so he did, right? What we now call geometry of space-time. We have to think of gravity as the shape. We have to think of gravity as the shape of space-time changing. Okay, Einstein said that space and time aren't fixed and immutable. They're interconnected, meshed together in what is known as space-time. Space-time can be warped, and matter curves space and time around it. How does matter curve time? Time is not a physical object. Time is a concept. Does matter also curve love and intelligence and grace and anger and all these other concepts that we invented? Does it curve everything? How can it curve time? How can it curve energy? How can it curve mass if all these are concepts? How do you curve a concept? But the interesting thing is how he labeled or how he illustrates these things, or how all these mathematicians illustrate these things. Why don't they illustrate it like this? This is what we would like to see. You know, why don't they curve it upwards so that people start asking questions? Say, oh, hold it. How does mass push upwards? See, they always have mass pushing the thing downwards. They put a ball in there, ball on canvas. Why does the ball push upwards on the canvas? Well, because if they put it like I do on the right, maybe people start asking questions, say, well, hold it. How does mass push upwards? See, we're always used to mass being pulled downwards by gravity. And if you put this as a picture, people would start asking a lot of questions. So they never illustrate it like that. They always illustrate it with the concave part downwards, okay? So that's cheating. They should at least once in a while, you know, so to wake people up so that people understand what's going on there. Why does it push upwards, the canvas upwards? And what pushes mass downwards? What pulls on it downwards? Gravity? You know, so yeah, they explain gravity with gravity. That's how they do it. Okay, and here you have similar or a contextual, same context there. It says a body like the Earth warps the structure of space and time around it. And so they have this satellite. This is from NASA, by the way. Okay, NASA has a little satellite moving around our space. And the only issue we like to ask is, what is that black stuff that holds all those stars out there? What is that? I mean, if this is space and time, the fishnet, what is the black stuff? That gives shape or contrast to the fishnet, to the canvas, to this trampoline that they've got there. But he says, and an object in orbit follows a path which is as straight as possible through space-time. Straight? That looks like it's going in a curve. It's curvilinear type of orbit, because, you know, the moon is not going straight. The moon is going around in circles. How do you call a circle straight? The edge of a circle, that would be a tangent, you know, to the circle. And then you can talk about straightness. But aside from that, you know, we got the issue that he's not talking about straight. He's talking about rectilinear, because he's talking about motion. Straight is a line. Itinerary is rectilinear, and he's talking about rectilinear itinerary, okay? But he says as straight as possible through that space-time. How can it move in straight lines when I see it going in circles around the depression there, okay, created by the Earth? So he says, so matter warps time as well as space. How does matter warp time? My God. It's known as gravitational time dilation, which we just covered, and it's possibly the strangest of all of Einstein's discovery. No kidding. Time is being distorted. Man, it's got to be the weirdest thing you ever imagined. Yeah. If time is being distorted by matter, we've got a serious mental problem in all of mathematical physics, in all of mathematics, because all these people are just mathematicians. Okay. He continues here. He says, this telescope proved that Einstein was in fact right. All the mathematicians are right. They're correct. They're true. They're never false. Okay? That gravity does curve space itself. How can you curve space if space is nothing? Didn't he talk about empty space? What does he mean by empty space? If we empty space of all matter, what do we have left? Nothing. But then they say nothing is made of something, of little particles that are called virtual particles. Two particles, we covered that last week. Two particles, a negative and a positive particle make a no particle, or a no ball. Or you have a black ball and a white ball and they make a no ball. When you separate them, you have a white ball and a black ball. Great. I mean, anybody can do that kind of magic. So he says, this telescope proved that Einstein was in fact right, that gravity does curve space itself. Since then, observation after observation have confirmed that matter curves space and slows down time. Now, how's that for religion? Okay. Old-time religion. Okay, and then he just mentions that LIGO, they got the Nobel Prize in 2015 for detecting gravity waves that travel at the speed of light and not 1 second faster. Okay, and they have this big apparatus. They had to do something. They were investigating and investing in LIGO for 50 years. They had better come up with something. They say, you guys better come up with something. We'll just give you a Nobel Prize and make you famous. That's what they did. No truth, no value to LIGO whatsoever. It's just a waste of money and time. Okay, so after all that, after he talking about 2 hours on gravity, what does good old Al-Khalili conclude? And this is the funny part, because he starts out saying, even today, understanding the true nature of gravity remains one of the biggest challenges in science, meaning they have no clue. Okay, let's get that right up front. He's saying, biggest challenges in science. They don't know what gravity is. We're still investigating. We're still running experiments. And the only experiments they needed to do was the one I did with a rock. Here, I'll do it with my comb. Okay, let it go. There, that's the only experiment you ever needed to do. Now you got to explain how Mother Nature does that experiment. And they just keep doing experiments and say, oh, we're going to do more experiments. Another LIGO, another big experiment, billion-dollar experiment. What do they need experiments for? They need to explain gravity. We're done. And it's got to be the simplest thing on earth. All you got to do is visualize the invisible. Once you do that, you're done. You got to tell me what came in contact with the rock that I let go of. Something had better come in physical contact with a rock, because otherwise you're putting spirits, ghosts, in that same space. You're saying it's done by magic. No, it's done by magic only because you can't see or touch, which is what we're used to in our everyday life. And we touch and see things, and so we're used to that. And suddenly someone says, look, something came in contact with a rock or with a pen or whatever you let go of, with the skin of the rock to bring it down. When the guy said, well, I can't see or touch anything, well, that's because this is not a question of seeing and touching. It's a question of visualizing. There better be something there that Mother Nature uses. Otherwise, you're filling that same space with black magic. Until you understand that, you haven't understood anything in rational science. I've come to an extraordinary conclusion. The different ways that time flows may not be some quirky byproduct of gravity. It may actually be gravity. Time is gravity. It may be the cause of gravity, the reason why objects fall. Time is the reason, the cause, the mechanism of why objects fall. Now, how's that for a theory? So my investigation deep into the weird ways of gravity has finally left me face to face with one of the greatest mysteries in all of physics, the nature of time itself. Yeah, if you don't define time, you don't know what you're talking about, then it's going to be hard. You're going to have trouble with the nature of time if you never define the word. Why does the apple fall? The apple falls because it's seeking out the place where time runs the slowest. After studying 10 years at the university, after going through this holy grail, of trying to find out what gravity is, that's what good old Al-Khalili comes up with. He says, time is not money, time is gravity, okay? Or maybe it's both, I don't know. And again, here are my conclusions. Let me put this over here. This guy is a caricature of a physicist. He's not a physicist. I don't care how many years he studied at the monastery. He has no clue what physics is about. Physics is not about experiments. Physics is not about mathematics. It's not about measuring. It's not about running experiments or calculations or equations or making predictions. None of that has anything to do with science. That's the old scientific method that died with the rational scientific method that came into being at the beginning of this century, really 2 years earlier, 1998. And so here I go again. He states that gravity is central to his line of work. He suggests he's an expert, that's what he does for a living. He can't define mass. He talks about an idiotic thing known as time dilation, which can easily be debunked with 2 hourglasses. You put one like I did at the top of the, the Eiffel Tower, and one at the bottom, okay? And you'll see that the one on the bottom goes faster, not slower as Einstein predicted. Okay, gravitational time dilation debunked. It can be debunked with 2 hourglasses. Doesn't understand the difference between describe and explain. He claims without justification that there is no object binding the earth to the sun. Yes, there is. It's known as the rope. A bunch of ropes, and actually, every atom in the earth is connected, physically connected to every atom of the sun. Otherwise, you're doing this with magic. You got to explain the mechanism why the earth doesn't fly out of the solar system. What are you going to say? What this guy says, that it's warp time? Is that time comes in contact with the skin of the earth, and that's what prevents the earth from flying out? Makes a rational proposal that matter warps time. Absolutely idiotic. Okay, no such thing as time, so you can't warp it. It's not a banana. It's not a hammock. You can't bend time like you bend a hammock. And if you can't dismiss and just say, well, I was just kidding. It was just an analogy. No, I need a physical mechanism for why the earth doesn't fly out of the solar system. Don't tell me later after 2 hours of telling me it was warp time that, oh, I was just kidding. No way. Asserts that a telescope proved matter warps space. How a telescope proved that? That space is nothing and you warp nothing. How did you warp nothing? Okay. And he says that time is what gravity is. Gravity is time. Time is gravity. Time is not money. Okay, folks.